You know that story we all love. The one about the lone genius fighting against a world of doubters who has a sudden eureka moment and just changes everything. It's an awesome story. But is it actually true? Let's dig into one of the most famous inventions ever and see if that classic tale really holds up. Okay, let's start with maybe the most epically bad prediction of all time. And this wasn't just some random person's opinion. This was the New York Times in 1903, basically saying that a real flying machine was, at best, 1,000,000 years away. 1,000,000 years. 69. That's it. Just 69 days. That's how much time passed between the New York Times publishing that article and two brothers from Ohio proving them, well, spectacularly wrong. And get this, the timing is almost unbelievable. On the literal exact same day that one of the world's biggest newspapers said flight was impossible for 1,000,000 years, Orville Wright wrote in his diary, "We started assembly today." I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's the perfect setup for that myth, right? The sudden breakthrough that comes out of nowhere and shocks everyone. But, to be fair to the New York Times, they weren't just pulling this out of thin air. Their skepticism was actually part of a much bigger trend. They were in some very, very good, very smart company. And we're not talking about just public opinion here. The absolute top minds in science and engineering were convinced it was a dead end. We're talking about famous astronomers, legendary physicists like Lord Kelvin, even the chief engineer of the entire U.S. Navy. The experts, the people who were supposed to know, they all said it couldn't be done. And they weren't exactly gentle about it either. The language they used was pretty brutal, calling the idea wholly unwarranted, if not absurd. That tells you everything you need to know about how hostile the environment was. To the establishment, trying to fly was basically a joke. So why were they so down on the idea? Well, they were looking at the evidence right in front of them. Just 2 days before that New York Times piece, a huge government-funded project led by a really respected scientist named Samuel Langley, well, his machine, the aerodrome, crashed right into the Potomac River. When people see big, expensive projects fail that publicly, it's pretty easy to conclude the whole thing is a waste of time. So the story seems perfect, right? You've got these two underdog brothers proving all the smarty-pants experts wrong. But is that what really happened? What if the path to a real breakthrough is completely different from the story we like to tell ourselves? To get a clearer idea, let's switch gears and look at another invention that changed the world: wireless communication. Its story isn't about a sudden flash of genius at all. It's about a slow, patient process of building an invisible foundation, piece by piece, over many, many decades. The whole thing started with this kind of intellectual relay race. First up was Michael Faraday, who came up with this wild idea of invisible lines of force in space. He passed the baton to James Clerk Maxwell, who took that abstract concept and turned it into a rock-solid mathematical theory. And then, finally, Heinrich Hertz took that theory and actually built an experiment that proved these invisible waves were real. And just look how long this took. This wasn't something that happened overnight. We're talking from 1831 with Faraday all the way to 1887 with Hertz. That's over half a century. It was this slow, steady buildup of pure scientific knowledge, with each person adding another crucial piece to the puzzle. And just like our flyboys, these guys also faced some serious skepticism. Michael Faraday, the guy who started it all, had no formal education, no fancy math skills. And his colleagues, they thought his ideas about invisible forces were complete nonsense. They actually called him an unreliable heretic. Sound familiar? Okay, so we've got this incredible, deep scientific understanding of how the world works. But how does that become the Wi-Fi in your house? That takes one last, absolutely critical step. And this is the part that blows my mind. Heinrich Hertz, the man who proved radio waves existed, had zero interest in them being useful. He was a pure scientist. He just wanted to know how the universe worked. When people asked him what his discovery was good for, he basically said, nothing. It just proves Maxwell was right. That's where the innovator comes in. People like Guglielmo Marconi didn't discover the fundamental science. Their genius was taking that deep well of knowledge built up for over 50 years and seeing a practical use for it, sending messages without wires. Marconi didn't have to invent the bricks. He was the architect who knew how to use them to build a house. So when we put these two stories, the story of flight and the story of wireless, right next to each other, a totally different picture of how invention really works starts to come into focus.
So, on one hand, you have the myth. It's a sudden eureka from a lone genius. But the reality? It's a slow, cumulative process built on decades of unseen work from lots of people. The myth says it appears out of thin air. Reality says it's built on a massive foundation of pure science. And here's the most important part. The myth says the doubters are just idiots. But the reality is, their skepticism is often perfectly reasonable, based on the only evidence they can actually see.
And that brings us right back to 1903. The experts weren't stupid. They were just reacting to the most visible piece of evidence out there, Langley's very public, very embarrassing failure. What they couldn't see was the huge, unseen foundation of research that the Wright brothers had been quietly building for years in their workshop. The experts saw the splash in the river. They didn't see the years of wind tunnel data. Their prediction was logical. It was just based on incomplete information. So this leaves us with a really interesting question, doesn't it? When we hear experts today call a new idea absurd or a million years away, are they just being short-sighted? Or are we all just looking at the latest public failure, totally unaware of the deep, unseen foundation being built right now, just waiting for its moment to finally take flight?